How's everybody doing this morning? Did you just say hungry, John? Get you a protein bar or something. Well, it's exciting to get to preach this morning. This title, When God Says No, that's such a popular thing, isn't it? When God says no. How many of you guys just love hearing the word no? Like, we have you all don't like hearing no. I'll tell you one thing, little kids, I feel like we have two little kids, soon to be another one, and saying no is like a way of life, I feel like, every day. No, you can't have a seventh cookie. No, you can't have this. No, you can't go into Grandpa's office to eat more candy. You know, all these different things that you're constantly saying no, but you think about it and then eventually your kid looks at you and says, you always say no at everything. You kind of start feeling like you do. And then when you think about growing up, we didn't like no either growing up. I mean, I think about some of the crazy moments of saying no, the things historically. I still remember like being in grade school when you thought you could date, but you didn't even know what dating was. But you thought, you know what, I'm going to ask somebody out, which really meant I'm probably never going to talk to you, but we will have correspondence. So you'd write a letter, right? You remember this? Younger generation, you all, text now. We had letters, okay? Pastor Tim, they had papyrus and carrier pigeons. We had messengers and stuff like that. I'm sorry I have to slip that in. He gets me all the time. I only get so many times to pick on him. But anyways, we had these letters we'd send out, and the letter would be, will you go out with me? Which is kind of funny looking back because we didn't really go anywhere. It was like we just wanted to have a title because at that day it seemed like that was what people were doing. And you'd put check yes or no. I don't even know why you would put the no in there or the or. Because if you did that long enough, there were times you get that letter back and the or was circled. But that was one of those moments where if you ever got a letter back that said no, it was unforgettable, wasn't it? Traumatizing. You might think that method is old school, but if my wife was here today, she would tell you I use that same method to ask her out. And yes, I know it sounds corny, but in the moment, it was exciting, okay? It was really fun. But when you think about no's, and then you get older, and then you think of like, no, I didn't make the team, or you hear, no, I didn't get into this school, no, I didn't get this job. Usually no's are corresponded with a negative emotion where we don't feel good about the outcome. We don't like to hear it. But in many ways, no's are part of directing us even to this day. Think about it. Most of you might be here in church because God said no to something that made you say yes to this. Isn't that interesting? I tell you one thing. If God would have said yes to my first desired job, I probably would not be here preaching. There were so many other things I thought I would be doing, and God had a different plan. How many of you guys would say that with your life right now? I had a plan, totally not at all what it ended up doing. God had his own plan, and apparently he wins that one. But I'm so thankful he does. How many times did you get a no that you were not happy about, and then later you realize why? Could be a relationship that you're really glad it didn't work out, looking back. Could be a job you're glad you didn't get. Because now you can look back and see the blessing. But one thing I've learned in our walk with the Lord is it's a constant journey of doors opening and doors closing and constant confusion as to, God, where are you taking me? God, where are we supposed to be? And that's why we're going to be talking about a story today about Paul on a journey that really was somewhat confusing because it's the first time Paul is told, don't go here. And so we're going to cover a little bit of that, but we only really have 10 verses today, and you're wondering, when you look at your outline, doesn't it look a little bit more polished than the last one you saw that I did? You guys didn't know if it was me or my dad preaching today. You just wait. There's going to be stuff on the screen that are going to pop up too. I'm sorry. For all of you that have been wanting notes, you got it. For all of you that are frustrated now because you can't draw on that part now and draw pictures because you have less space, I feel you. Anyways, we're going to be in Acts chapter 16. And we'll be going through verses 1 through 10. But let's just open up in prayer before we read God's word, just to make sure that he's honored in everything. Lord, just thank you so much for the opportunity to preach. Lord, anytime you give me this opportunity, it's one where there is constant you just messing with me in different ways, all for the good, but just definitely times when you want to be certain about certain things, and then, Lord, you just change it, and you're showing me how to trust you. And, Lord, so even though this is a sermon preached, it's a sermon felt. Thank you, God, for constantly being a leading force in my life, even when I fail to do it the way you want me to. Lord, be with us today, and may this just be honoring to you first and foremost, and that our hearts are totally open to what you have for us. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're going to read through Acts chapter 16, 1 through 10. I want to first before I go through that passage, in our introduction for A and B, I want to just talk about a little brief overview of what is happening. You may have not been here last week, so I want you to, before we kind of read about what's going on, it's good to kind of know what we're coming from. So we know Paul is on his way. Today we're going to talk about his second missionary journey. Now, last week what was talked about was a separation that happened. Anyone remember who that was between? It was Paul and Barnabas. Good job, Tia. Barnabas, right there. So, a division amongst them. Now, here's the thing. When we look at their personality types, Paul is the get-it-done guy. He's the guy that's in your face. He's a mover and a shaker. Barnabas is son of encouragement, right? He's that guy that comes along the scenes. He doesn't crave the stage. He's more of, I'm going to be working behind the scenes. Let me tell you something. If I had to pick my favorite kind of ministry, it's behind the scenes stuff. Now, you may not think that because I'm sitting up here right now. But if I feel the most comfortable sitting in the far back, finding ways to help in that avenue and watching somebody else up front. But when we look at Paul and Barnabas, you have two individuals that really worked so well together, mainly because Paul was somebody that not a lot of people had much faith in at the very beginning. Barnabas took him and brought him under his shoulder and really worked with him, cultivated some growth, and really played a huge role in what Paul would later become. Now, after one missionary journey, a lot was accomplished. And Paul goes up to Barnabas, and I love, and this is chapter 15. I just want to go really quickly to verse 36 there, because this is Paul walking up to Barnabas. And they're in Antioch, and he says, after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, let's return and visit the brothers and sisters in every city in which we proclaim the word of the Lord and see how they are. Now, this is awesome because in some versions it says he wanted to go encourage the churches. So Paul knows that Barnabas is all about encouragement. So he says, hey, Barnabas, how would you feel about us going back on another trip? Encouraging these churches. You know, we've already proclaimed the word. Let's go encourage them. Let's go be there and see what they're doing, how they're doing. And Paul, in every which way, when I read through the text, it almost feels like Paul really wants to just find his way out to share the gospel and to plant more churches. Deep inside, I feel like that's what he was really saying. But he's going, Barnabas, let's go encourage. That's right up your wheelhouse. Let's go do that. And then in verse 37, Barnabas wanted to take John called Mark. Now, last week you would have heard that John Mark plays a huge, huge role in outreach in Africa. Pretty cool thing, but we didn't know that. If we would have been in this story, we wouldn't have known about that here. This was later down the road. But there's a division because Barnabas wants to take this man, but the problem with him is exactly right here. It said, but Paul was of the opinion that they should not take along with them this man who had deserted them. In Paul's mind, Paul operated very militantly. And you got to think that if he goes out on a trip, we'll just put you guys in the scenario. If you went to a battle kind of field and somebody goes with you and in the midst of conflict, this person deserts you, are you going to want to take them back? Are you going to take a chance with them? You're sitting there going, no, you had your chance. If it happens again, it could be my life here. And they had been in some rough waters here. And so Paul's like, nope, sorry. You had your chance. It's not going to work. Now Barnabas, obviously this is Barnabas' cousin, so there is a family connection there. But Barnabas sees in him what Paul can't see. He sees what God can do through him. Because John Mark's story is not over. Let me tell you, how glad are you that somebody didn't give up on you? If you look at John Mark, what an amazing comeback story. And many of us in here are comeback stories. We are people that someone gave us a chance. We've blown it. And there's always that one person that says, I'm not going to quit on you. And if you're that one person, you already know who you are more like, and that's Barnabas. Barnabas was that one that says, you know what? You've given up on yourself, but God hasn't given up on you. And for many of us in here that need to hear that, no matter what we've done, God hasn't given up on us. There's still more for us to do. How do I know that? Because you still have a pulse. And you're still here. When God's done, you'll know you won't have a pulse. That's when God's done with us. On this earth anyways. Now, that's what happens with John Mark. He takes off, and it's funny, Satan tries to divide him, but really what Satan just did was he just caused two missionary groups to go, which really kind of blew up in his face. Instead of one, it turned to two. So Barnabas takes John Mark to Cyprus, that's where it starts, at his hometown. Paul takes a man by the name of Silas. And Silas would have been a clear choice because, first of all, he was a Roman citizen. He was a Jew. Automatically, when Paul would travel, he would go to a place where they would first go to the synagogues. They would teach there first before they would go anywhere else. And to get in, one of the things that had to happen is you had to be circumcised. You had to be a Jew. You had to have certain things, ducks in line, to get in there first. So Silas would have had he would have been a clear choice, well respected. Paul chose him, and they left. And they took off. And of course, they go to Tarsus, which is Paul's hometown. Now, that's their takeoff spot. Now, if you look at the map, I want you to take a look at your awesome map. I don't have a laser pointer. I'm just not that technological. But I will have you look at the map for a second. I want you to take a look at Antioch. It's on the right. If you look at the biggest, there's a big kind of tannish color called Syria. In there, you're going to find Antioch. Have you found Antioch? Thank you, students. You're on it. Are the adults also on it? That's the question. Are they able to stay as well here on this? So you see that they're going up north into Tarsus, which is a purple category area, right? Cilicia area. And so that's where they're going to start from. After they leave from Antioch, they go to Tarsus. And then they're going to head up through Derbe, Lystra, Iconium, all the way up through here. Now this is interesting because as they go through, we're going to stop, today is only 10 verses we're going to cover. So we're going to really kind of end at Troas, which is right up the tip, right on the port city. And that's farther west. But as we kind of look at the trip here, we're seeing that they come into Lystra. And they come through Derbe. Now they're close in proximity. It says now in chapter 16, verse 1 through 10, I want you to look at verses 1 through 3 as we kind of look at one of the people that they're going to bring along the journey. Now, this guy's going to be a pretty instrumental person. And this is where we get to first hear about him. Now, in verses 1 through 3, it says, Now Paul also came to Derbe and to Lystra, and a disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was a Greek, and he was well spoken of by the brothers and sisters who were in Lystra and Iconium. Now, this is a guy that, first of all, now Timothy, this is the guy we're talking about that pastors a church eventually. We think of 1st, 2nd Timothy in our Bibles. This is Paul writing to Timothy. This is one of Paul's right-hand guys in the future, a very important player in this whole thing. And he's young in the church. In fact, he's somewhat timid. We find that out as Paul writes to him. And he will be one of those big-time pastors at a young age, and he'll face a lot of challenges. Paul will look at him kind of like a son figure. In fact, in 2 Timothy, he talks about him being a child of the faith, someone special to him. And so there'll be a strong connection that they have. But in this stage, he's the young guy. They need a third guy. They need someone that can do somewhat of the grunt work that's going to happen on a trip like this. Like, for instance, when Paul, on the first journey, there was Paul, Barnabas, and John Mark, right? So you had a third person. They need a third person, an understudy. And this guy would have gotten to know Paul just slightly on the first journey, but he would have saw what Paul went through, and he would have become a convert, a believer. And then when Paul comes back, he's grown a lot. He's somebody that everyone's talking about. He's one of those individuals that comes out of a mixed home. More than likely, his dad's not around anymore because we don't hear much about his influence, but we do hear about the influence of his grandmother and his mother. We hear about that more in 2 Timothy as well. Now, when you think about having a Greek as a father and a mother that's a Jew and it says she's a believing Jew, he would have been in a home where he would have been mixed in a lot of ways. And what would have held him back in the Jewish circles is having a Greek father or a Gentile father. Now, Paul would know this about him. And Paul's like, I'm going to take you. You're going to go with me. But as he chooses him, it says Paul wanted this man to leave with him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in those parts, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. This would play an important role for him getting into the synagogues, okay? So when we look at that, we say that is a cruel thing to do to a young adult. It wasn't so that he would be saved, because we know that that doesn't save you. It was a tool to help him on the mission field. It was something, a sacrifice that he was willing to take in order to pursue people for the Lord. Anytime we are called to do mission work, and honestly, every believer has mission work to do, we are at a location where we have to ask ourselves, what is something in our lives that could be a stumbling block to those we're trying to reach? This would have been one of the biggest reasons Timothy would have had to go through this painful process, was to make sure he didn't have a stumbling block amongst Jewish people. How many of us would be willing to give up something in order to be a greater witness? Many times that's the case in locations where we're at. And so we find out that Timothy goes with him. Now it gets interesting because they are now on their journey, and then verses 4 through 5, it says, Now while they were passing through the cities, they were delivering the ordinances for them to follow, which had been determined by the apostles and elders in Jerusalem. So the churches were being strengthened in the faith and were increasing in number daily. So here's the thing. When they were going to these churches, Paul had just came back from getting information from the church of Jerusalem. The information were certain doctrines that had to be presented. They couldn't put it on a mass email and send it to all the churches. They had to make sure they told them, hey, first of all, salvation is by grace. It is fully by grace that we're saved here. It's not of our works. And then there was the idea of separating, the idea of putting Gentiles and Jewish in common union. It was the idea of sharing together and some of the discriminatory things that they had going on. These were areas that they were saying, hey, we're going to work on these things and make sure these things are preached in all the churches. So they had these doctrines that they were presenting, and not just that, they were encouraging these people, these churches. And guess what? When you encourage and when you increase doctrine and knowledge, guess what? What's the byproduct? It said they were strengthened and they were growing in numbers daily. It doesn't say that they learned how to be more entertainment-based. It didn't even say that they tried to find things that were pleasing to the ears. It was they imparted truth and they strengthened the body. Now, when we do that as a church, that's when we're going to see a strengthened church that will add to numbers daily. And so this is something that happens here. It's a formulation that works. Now, as they're doing this, we find that they go through these churches, and Paul has a desire, and you can sense there's a desire for him to focus on Asia Minor. The reason I would say that is because his third missionary journey, he is actually going to go all the way through here, and there'll be church after church after church. You kind of see them in Asia. If you look here on your map, the big pink kind of area, you see little yellow dots. You see all these different churches that will form. And so a lot's going to happen, but it's not the timing now. Here's what's going to happen. In verses 6 through 8, it says they passed through Phrygian and Galatian region after being forbidden by the Holy Spirit the word in Asia, to speak the word in Asia. Can you imagine that? Paul, it doesn't tell us how this went down. But when you read this, you start thinking, I wonder what happened. How would they be forbidden to share the good news in this area? That seems kind of contrary to God, doesn't it? To say, don't do this here. It doesn't say exactly how it was done. But it's telling Paul, there's a place I want you to go, and this isn't it yet. So in some ways, you must understand that a door shut doesn't always mean it never happens again, because God doesn't just say yes or no. Sometimes he says, wait. You ever know that? Did you realize that's even a third option? We always think God's a yes or no God, but let me tell you, sometimes the answer he's giving you for the moment is wait. So when you're going, God, I don't know, I have a big decision to make, and I'm praying for wisdom here. Left or right, where am I going on this? Could be a big job, could be retirement, could be anything, and you're going, God, I got to know now, okay? God, I've got a time frame. In a few days, then I got to get an answer. The minute you give God a time frame, what are you doing? Putting God on your terms. How well do you think that's going to work? You're not his God. He's yours. So when you're asking God for counsel on a direction, and you are searching him, and you don't sense a yes, you don't sense a no, there's the third, and that might just be wait. That is the hardest thing for us to deal with, isn't it? We'd rather have a no, wouldn't we, than a wait. Because we wait and we go, okay, God, that's good and all, but we got time. And we live in the United States of America, the most impatient country of the world. That's what I call it. We are very impatient people. And so waiting isn't a thing that we struggle with. But I can tell you one thing, some of the greatest men of God and women were defined in the waiting period. Because as I'm waiting, what am I doing? I'm trusting. Right? I have to. If I'm waiting, it's because I know, God, you got a plan. And I'm okay with it. Now, any of you that know me know that this is a really hard pill to swallow. I want to move quick. I'm like, God, okay, what are we doing? This way. By the end of the day, you should tell me, right, God? I can wait till the sun goes down. But God is constantly trying to tell me, Daniel, slow down. Do not try to get ahead of me. But isn't that a challenge? We try to get ahead of God, don't we? And God is slowing things down in our life because until we slow down, we can't see or hear him in his still voice. We just can't. I can tell you, left to my own devices, I will run crazy. I will go all day fast, and that for me sometimes is fun, and yet it's chaos. God has to get me to stop being chaotic. He has to slow me down to get through to me. And sometimes that means shutting some doors just to get me to stop. I guess if we would be completely honest, that probably has happened to many of us here, hasn't it? So he's trying to go into these places. Asia Minor, Bithynia. Bithynia is up north. He's not able to go there. He's forbidden to go there or to speak there. All through Asia, forbidden to share and to speak there. And he ends up at Troas. About 250,000 people live in Troas. It's a merchant kind of coastal area. You can imagine he's just sitting there staring at the water going, God, you must have a sense of humor. Where are we going now? I've tried here, but I have no idea what you want me to do. Is this sounding familiar in life? God, I don't know what you want me to do. Where do you want me to go? What are you trying to show me in this? I don't get this. Like, in life, when you face door shut, don't you just get tired of that? And you're like, God, why? What are we doing? That is so something that communicates to all of us. And he gets there, and when he puts his head down tonight, knowing that he has no idea where to go. He had a plan, and God's totally rewriting the script. It's like he's looking at his phone and on directions, says recalculating. He's like, where are we going? And so he goes to bed that night, and he gets a vision. Now understand that the entire time Paul is going, God is directing him. You realize that? God is directing him. By saying no here, God's moving him over here. By saying no here, God's moving him over here. The entire time he's being directed. And so some of us could say, well, this doesn't make any sense. No, God's still moving him. He's just fine-tuning the location of where he's putting him. That's what he does. And so as he puts him here, there comes a point where in verse 9, it says, and a vision appeared to Paul in the night, a man of Macedonia. First of all, where's Macedonia? Look on your map. Okay, he's at Troas right now. You found Troas, right? If you don't, find someone next to you. Say, where's Troas? And they'll show you. And if you look across the water, all the way over, you'll see this nice orange thing in the top left part of the map, and that's called Macedonia. Understand, it says Asia here, where they're coming from, but this is modern-day Turkey, okay, just to kind of get an idea of geography here. And as you look at Macedonia, can you understand what that location is if we were to look at a map today? Looking something like Greece, right? Okay, so this is an area where there is someone in the vision screaming, come help us. Paul, this is a big deal because leaving Asia Minor and now entering European influence here. It's a big deal because if you really do think about the ramifications of this moment, do you guys understand that our Judeo-Christian roots come out of European influence? Do you realize that? People joke around, they say, why is, say, the organ or piano such a huge thing in church music here? That came from Europe. There are so many things that we are influenced by here, but the gospel moved here from there. But here's the cool thing. What you're reading about now is how the gospel got to Europe. We are finding that what we're preaching about today had a long journey back. And it's pretty exciting. So Macedonia means that he's staring out at Troas and he sees water, but he realizes I'm called to go to the other side of the water. This would be scary. It doesn't say Paul was scared, but he's human. There's got to be some fear in this. But he's excited. In fact, it's pretty cool because it says that when he had seen the vision in verse 10, it says, we immediately sought to leave for Macedonia. Immediately. God directs him. God gives him vision. But guess what? The response now is now on Paul's turf, and he immediately follows. He doesn't sit there and go, God, I'm not sure about this. I don't know. A lot of water between me and there. Never been over there. No. Here's what happens. He immediately leaves, and this is why. Concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. He concluded on that. He was able to look back and say, that door was shut. This door was shut. God, I'm starting to see how you're directing it. You see, when you look at all the doors that have shut in your life, but you get it with a God-style lens, meaning your worldview is a God view. If you have a biblical worldview, you can look at the past and say, God, I can see your hand in the history books of my life. Can you see it? Even you here today, can you see God bringing you here today? You look at your family. Can you see God brought your family here today? How many of you were prayed for by somebody and you're here because of that? Have you all forgotten how you got here? And what God's done with you here? For us that maybe have grown up at this church, you've spent a long time in one church, you can see God's hand in so many areas in all these families. I can see it. I've seen some of you adults where your kids came to know Christ here. That alone made it worth being here, right? Your story is not done here. This story was about to begin in Europe. And it would be an amazing staging place for gospel advancement. But Paul not only had to be open to be directed, but he also had to be obedient and looking to hear the voice of God. I can tell you right now, that's a lot of times where we are challenged. The thing is, Paul was constantly in communication with the Lord. He had to be attentive to God. And here's the thing, when we're talking about being directed by God, if we're not in prayer, we are totally missing things if we're not talking to Him. If we're not trying to listen to His voice, then every door shut, we don't realize if it's God or Satan. Because guess what? Satan's in the door and closing business too. Do you believe that Satan can open a door? He can. Can he close doors? Yeah. The only way he can't open or close a door is if God handles that door. Because he still has to answer to him. Now, when you think about, just go into some applications here. If I can find my application page. The good thing is if I can't find it, it's up there. It's on the screen. So in the first column here, principles to personally apply, we talked about it kind of briefly in here, but when God closes a door, it is always for the purpose of opening another. Let me tell you, when you think of life that way, you know how much peace you can have in life? Knowing that when you're trusting God, that when something doesn't work out, it's God's directing for you. Just think of how your day is different. You'll be in the car, and someone pulls out in front of you. You'll find that out right away. Once you get to the roundabout, it's going to happen, right? You'll get down there, someone's going to pull in front of you, and you have a couple ways to look at it. You could say, how dare they do this? I'm going to go up on their bumper and let them know how frustrated I am about this. And who knows, they might get in front of you and decide to go 10 miles under the speed limit. How dare they do that? But there is a way you could look at it differently. When you trust that God's in the details, you're thinking, God could be slowing us down because there's an accident He's keeping me from. That's a whole other way to look at that, isn't it? You could look at life that way. But instead of saying, God, why are you doing this to me? Say, God, what are you trying to show me in this? Man, just changing perspective on how you look at conflict, challenge, and all of those things. God, what is in this that you're showing me? Because you're allowing it, which means there's a purpose for it. God, I don't want to miss the details because I don't want it to last any longer than it has to. More than likely, every one of you is going through something. Or you're about to go through something. Or you've just came out of something. That's usually the cycle. We're in one of those three camps at all given times. But I can tell you right now, when you look at Paul's journey, he was literally floating to wherever God was leading him. And when you sit there and go, God, I'm giving you the handlebars. You're taking the wheel of this life. I'm going to trust you. I can still make a plan. I just have to be open to God changing it. And knowing that when he does, it's for the ultimate good. Because in this story, we can look at it now and say, wow, Paul, we're glad you went to Europe. We see a lot of what happened by going there. We can even see how it was even profitable for Barnabas and Paul to split for this time, for what it would do for mission work down south. God always has an opportunity in a hard moment. And guess what? Well, why would he be changing the script? Most of the time is because we have such a small vision of what God can do. You know, in Ephesians 3:20, I love that passage because it says, who can do exceedingly abundantly. I'm going to read it because sometimes I say things and my wife's like, you're not saying it right. And the worst thing is sometimes I teach it that way, and I'm like, oh no, I've said this to people, and no one's called me on it. But Ephesians 3:20 says, now to him who is able to do far more abundantly beyond all that we ask or think, according to the power that works within us. When you realize that's the God you serve, he can do abundantly beyond what you can ask, think, anything. It means that when Paul was thinking, hey, I got this great idea. I'm going to work on Asia Minor. He's going, dude, I got way bigger plans. Just hold on for the ride. It's going to be a big one. Most of the time when God's shutting your door, it's because your vision's too small. God's got something bigger. And that scares us sometimes. It shouldn't, though. Because if we can be used for a bigger plan, then guess what? We get to share in this. We get to enjoy this with God. Letter B. The ultimate priority in evangelism is discipleship. I want you to understand that one real quick. The ultimate priority in evangelism is discipleship. I'm tired of people saying they're two different things. They really are one of the same. They go together. You can't have one without the other. I see churches that are all about evangelism. And some say, well, we focus more on discipleship. I'm like, really, the goal of discipleship is reproduction. How do you reproduce? The idea is evangelism, right? People getting saved is reproduction. And so when I look at those two things, they're crucial. And how it kind of correlates with the story is that Paul, everyone thinks of Paul and they think he's this awesome evangelist. And we think of a kind of Billy Graham character who goes out and preaches to all these thousands. What you don't realize is he's also focused on discipleship. Because this whole second journey, what is he doing? He's going back to the churches. A lot of times we share the gospel with somebody and we think, hey, they got saved. Adios. May God be with you. We take off. Paul didn't believe in it that way. The mindset was he wanted to always come back to those who heard and said, how can I strengthen you and grow you up? You want to get an idea of what the church is all about, this church especially? Matthew 28, 19 through 20. I want to read that to you. Or 29, 19, 20. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That is when it says go make disciples of all nations, evangelizing, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But then it says this. This is the part we miss. Teaching them to follow all that I commanded to you. You want to know what coming to church is? It's this part. Teaching them to follow the commandments of God. And behold, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Just so you know, that's Jesus talking. That is as a command. When we think of the importance of evangelism, I'm going to tell you right now, it's extremely important for us to understand the role of discipleship. If we have time to share the gospel, we have to have time to follow up people. Lastly, having a right passion for the lost comes from knowing God. If there's one thing you read about Paul, and I love it, he's like, to live is Christ, to die is gain. How many people can say something like that and mean it? He literally meant it. How do I know this? If you look at his journey, there's so many places he goes. At one point, he's taking off saying, guys, I know where I'm going. They're coming after me. I know where they're going. They're going to imprison me. He could tell at some of the journeys when people are saying, don't go, Paul, he says, I need to go for the sake of the gospel. This guy truly lived it. He wasn't perfect by any means, but he lived. Nobody would ever question his heart for evangelism. But here's the thing. Paul wasn't just some special guy that had a heart for evangelism. He had a heart for evangelism because he loved God. And he knew God. We have to know that we can have that same heartbeat. But the formula is the same. We have to know God. When it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, when you can do that, you'll have no problem with the next command, love your neighbor as yourself. But truly doing that means I've got to know him. If I want a passion for the lost, it comes from a passion for the Lord. I can always tell when I'm drifting. Not always, but I can tell a lot of times when I am. A lot of times it's when my head goes away from lost people. When I don't see people that need Jesus, and I just think of myself. I would say that's the same way all of us can drift. When you start thinking about yourself and not about people that need Jesus, you're drifting. When you're thinking about your mission in life instead of God's, you're drifting. He's got a plan with your life. And you might think it's, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. I've got these big plans, I got these big dreams. Let me tell you, a lot of us have said that before. And what did God do with those? For you that are younger, you make your plans about God. You say, I would love to do these things, but I really have more desire to do what God wants me to be and do. Whatever he wants me to do, I'll do. When you can honestly say that to God, you will go on the most exciting journey of your life. You truly will. Because then guess what? There's no anxiety of picking things. God gets to do it for you. When you're young, picking a husband or a wife, that's a scary thing. It's not if you're trusting God with it. Picking a job and career, that can be very stressful in your life. Not if God's doing it. Let me tell you, when I got to a point where I could say, God, I don't have a choice anymore. You've already made the choice. That was the most stress-free moment of my life. Believe it or not. I remember in this job, this role as a pastor, I said, God, I would like to do something different. I remember that. Some of you remember that too, because you could see it in my face. Or you heard me. I'm like, God, I didn't think about God saying, Daniel, what's up with me being your king and you thinking you can make those decisions? But I remember just saying, God, maybe you could use me here. Maybe you could use me here. It'd be a lot easier if I just did that. And then I realized something. I couldn't find any person in the Bible that God said, whatever you'd like to do, just do it. Yeah, just put a stamp of God on there. We're good to go. No, every one of them said, God, anyone else? But God said, no, I've got a task for you. And I just remember that point when someone's like, well, do you feel called to the ministry? I'm like, I do. Which means I don't have any other choice. And I have to be okay with that. And I have to realize that God is going to do something great in my life if I continue to follow his call. I don't know what it's going to look like. And if someone says, Daniel, what do you think it's going to look like in 2 years? I'm at a point now I can't give you an answer. All I know is as long as I can just focus my attention on the Lord and keep running that direction, he's going to fit the other pieces together. And I can tell you right now, having a little girl on the way in my life, someone's like, what are you thinking? I'm like, I'm just trusting God more now. We got 2 boys. That was different. A girl is a scary thing because I don't even know what to do with a girl. My wife's literally working on this baby room, uncontrollable speed, by the way. Like, it literally, we painted it in like a week. And we've been working on it every day. So you go in there, and of course, it's pink. I haven't had a pink room in my house my whole life. Never would have thought. I go in the room, there's pink stuff everywhere. There's a lot of it you guys brought into the house, some of the gifts. And it's looking like a girl room. And I'm going, I didn't grow up with girl rooms, and now we got one. And people are like, are you ready? I'm like, are you kidding me? Do I look right? I'm not ready. Let me tell you what I'm ready for. God, you got to take this. Like you're going to have to direct me that much more. And you know what? That's where I find my peace. So my question to you is this. Are you in a position right now where you're running the show? Because if you are, talk about anxiety and talk about stress. If Paul was out there on this journey, thinking about how we're going to do this, 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 let me tell you, that guy would be not enjoying any of this journey. He would have quit on the first one. He was saying, God, wherever you lead me, I'll go. Let me ask you this. Is that you? Are you in a position right now where if God says, let something go, are you willing to? If God says, I need you to show up here more, is that going to be something you're willing to do? Because the true test is God king of my life? Is he king? Then you're going to learn how to trust him with your todays and your tomorrows. And you're going to have to allow him to lead you. I have a closing song here I want to play here in a second. And it's a little longer song, which is why I'm going to start a little earlier. But I don't want you to think about the words of this song are crucial. Because the song is called Spirit Lead Me. Imagine that. It's a song that talks about the importance of just wherever you want me to go, I'll go. And so this is a time of invitation where when we start this song, basically we have our leadership come forward. It's a time for you to respond. But it could be for you, you're going, I don't even know what having a relationship with God looks like. Because at the beginning, I can't know God without first giving my life to him. And that comes out of just an act of obedience, saying, God, I believe in you. I believe in your son, that Jesus died and came and died on the cross for my sins. I believe that, but I've not truly accepted it yet. That could be what's holding you back, is that you believe in God, but you haven't put your faith and trust in him yet. And that's that moment you put him in charge, where he's King Jesus of your life. That could be the reason you're questioning everything, is that hasn't happened yet. If that's you, I'd ask that you come down. Myself and Pastor Tim will be over here. Come talk to us. If you haven't made that decision, we can walk you through it, how to make that personal decision. But if you're sitting here and you're going, I need to take a step of God, I need to let go and trust you, because I'm losing myself just trying to put it all and hold it all together. God, I need to be better at letting you lead me and trusting you with the doors closed and the doors that have opened, knowing that your plan's better than mine. If that's you, please come forward. Right over here, come down and pray. There's our leadership team right here if you want to talk to one of them, or they can pray with you. Maybe you just want to sit there and watch the song and let those words just speak to your heart. That's totally fine too. Maybe you're like, I don't like the song, I don't want to get up. Then I just want you to shut your eyes and pray. Whatever God's working on your heart right now, it might be different than what we've talked about. It might be something you know exactly what it is. Whatever it is, you do business with God today. So I'm going to pray. We'll have the lights dimmed, and we'll have the song play, and that'll be a time of invitation. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for all that you do, all that you're doing. The stage where Paul's about to go on a whole nother expanse of this missionary work. Big things are about to happen, Lord, and it just sets the stage for the next time we get to talk. But Lord, the question is, what are you doing in our hearts today? What are we willing to let you lead? When we made you king, did we really make you king? Do you have control? Or will we try to drag you along on the journey and want you to bless our works even though we're not really putting you first? I just pray today that whatever, God, you've convicted us to do, that we would work off of that conviction and take it to you, whatever it is. Lord, that we would give you honor and praise in the choices that we make